right, well, we'll get started. It's 3:30. Okay, so for the recording, we'll ask them to start the recording now. Okay, hi everybody, welcome. I am so excited about this panel today. For those of you who, for the reasons that you came here, I'm sure there are many, and for me, I think about the future of the planet, the future of democracy, ethics in AI, the plastic circle in the Pacific Ocean. I think about all these things and I get overwhelmed. And one of the things that really bolsters me, truly bolsters me, is this idea of business as a force for good. And that B Corps not only have the mindsets and the guidance, but they also have the governance around how can you make sure that a business is really following through on what it intends to do. That it's not just greenwashing, that it's not just a glossy marketing ad, but it is a genuine culture that's built into how people act day to day. For those of you who are not familiar with B Corps or not very familiar, in a nutshell, B Corps are businesses that are in the business that believe that business can be a force for good. And so they have something called a triple bottom line, which is people, planet, and profit. You probably know that traditional businesses have a single bottom line for profit. And so generally officers of a business have a fiduciary responsibility to maximizing shareholder value, maximizing profit. And that has led to some really tough things. It's been impactful for global warming, for polarization is surprisingly profitable. And even the income gap in this country is growing, and probably many of you know this, but the upper income bracket is growing at a faster pace than the middle class and the lower income. And that gap is widening, and it's actually growing sharper and sharper. So I am so excited about the panelists we have today. We have three people who are very active in this space, who are doing it day to day. And so what I hope is that by the end of the session, you'll leave with concrete ideas, you'll leave with some inspiration, you'll have some clarity on what some of the real life challenges are and maybe ways to look at them and how to overcome them. Before we begin, I just want to also say that this event is being sponsored by Minnesota B Local. For those of you who are not familiar with B Locals, there are small communities, or actually growing communities, all across the United States and across Canada that are people in the B Corp community really banding together locally and helping this movement grow. So Minnesota B Local is brand new, and I'll have a link at the end so you can sign up for our information if you're interested in checking us out. And I am Sarita Parikh. I'm a co-chair for the Communications Committee for Minnesota B Local, and I'm also a founder of a social impact startup called Jomanity. Okay, so let's introduce our panelists. We'll start with Alejandro. Alejandro Fenn is a tech founder of a company called Global Gaming Initiatives. Global Gaming won a World's Best Award by the B Corps. So welcome, Alejandro.
Thank you, Sarita.
Thank you.
Awesome to be with all of you. Of course, for me, I started Global Gaming Initiative as a college student, and it was at the same time, kind of introduced at the same time I was reading Michael Porter, obviously a very well-known business thought leader. His new report on creating shared value had just come out, 2011. And that whole idea of, hey, deficits in our environment and our society, create costs just from the strictly private enterprise business model of the goal of profitability. And so it was really fun because at the same time I'm building this game company that's about using games for social good. How do we do that? How do we even get into this space and present it in a way that can gain traction? I'm learning about Michael Porter in my econ classes and developmental economics. And I have to say a thank you to a bunch of University of Minnesota. There were law students and business school students that they were the ones that introduced me to B Corp. I had never actually heard of B Corps until I had a little session with them. They were helping different social enterprises. So I have a lot of gratitude for those students, and excited to talk more about where B Corps are at, where they need to go, and how they can fit in this broader paradigm shift that we're all a part of.
That's awesome. I love that you have, as a mom, when I think of video games, I do not think of video games and social impact. So I love that combo. Chris, I'd like to introduce Chris Marquis. He just released this book, Better Business, and I will tell you, I read that underlining and highlighting and having annotations in a book is a sign of deep respect for the author. So mine is just full of ink. So respect. So Chris, can we hear a little bit about your path to B Corp?
Yeah, sure thing. And thanks so much, Sarita. I'm really honored that you have it and you've actually, marked it up. That is a true mark of respect. Yeah, so like Sarita mentioned, I'm Chris Marquis. I'm a professor at Cornell University. I teach and research in areas of social business, environmental sustainability. My path into B Corp is a circuitous one, I guess. I actually learned about B Corps similar to Alejandro from university students. Before Cornell, I taught for 10 years at Harvard Business School. And, this was about 15 years ago now, what you taught on when you were interested in social engagement was corporate social responsibility. And, we talked about large companies where, basically the social mission was like a sort of a sidecar and one of those sort of motorcycles with a sidecar. And the student said to me one day, we said, we shouldn't be studying this. We should be studying companies that have social impact at their core, like B corporations. And named a couple, Seventh Generation was one of the ones that I remember them naming. And I'd never heard of B Corporation, sort of embarrassing, as the professor, the students telling me like things to learn in this class. And I went back to my office, Googled it, got in touch with the founders of B Lab, which is the organization, the nonprofit organization that certifies the B corporations, wrote the first Harvard Business School case study on B Lab in 2010 and another one in 2015. And, been researching it for over a decade and was really sort of an honor to put it together in this book to profile this community that I think is making a tremendously important contribution to transitioning our system from one that's focused on members to one that's focused on stakeholders. So thanks so much for having me as part of the panel.
Thank you, Chris. I'm really excited about your work. And I'd like to introduce Lee Wallace. She is CEO and Queen Bean of Peace Coffee. I'm going to just say I really recommend Birchwood. That is my favorite. So Peace Coffee has been doing sustainable, fair, responsible farming and coffee for almost 25 years. They're in their third decade. And so they were doing this before it was cool. So Lee, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure, yeah, I hail from the great state of New York. I grew up in upstate New York in the 70s. And I think my interest in B corporations is really directly related to my upbringing. So, my father had also grown up in upstate New York, and what he talked to us about our whole childhood was about the power of businesses to support and sustain communities. And he had seen so many businesses across upstate New York fold up, pack out, and seen the subsequent devastation on those communities. So I was really raised to believe in the power of business. And I started working for Peace Coffee in 2006, came in as the CEO. And right away, I saw that this was a business that was having impact in communities around the globe. So in coffee growing communities, but then also in Minneapolis. Fell in love with the business, ran it for a number of years, and then purchased the business in 2018 when the former owners decided it was time to sell. But I've been the very lucky recipient of their founding vision, which was really very pioneering, which is that there eventually would be a movement like this, where businesses would be demonstrating the power of businesses that are in it for good.
Mm-hmm. And that makes sense. It does seem like all of this is about incremental change from the, on the shoulders of the people that came before us. So Lee, can you help me understand, is a public benefit corporation the same thing as a B Corp? What is the distinction between those things? I
think that's an important thing to clarify from the outset. So there's two things that we're talking about, two distinct things. So public benefit corporations is a legal designation. So it's the way your business is legally structured. Minnesota allows businesses to organize as a public benefit corporation, and you have to state the benefit that your corporation exists to create. That designation is available in various states and different state by state. The formal B Lab certification, Chris referred to this earlier, the B Lab, that's an actual certification that your company has to go through. And it's very extensive, and it looks at all aspects of your business and the impact you're having on community, on employees, on the environment. Like you said, it examines your triple bottom line.
And so Chris, can you help me understand?
Sure.
So B Corps sound great. They sound very, very easy to buy into, but do they really make a difference? Can you help us understand kind of across the industry and across different, across the globe, really, how do these really have an impact?
Right. Great question. I think that, they have a very large impact in a number of ways. So, like Lee was mentioning, there's a very rigorous certification process to become a B corporation. Companies have to get 80 out of 200, and it's a certification across things like, treatment of employees, communities, customers, environment, and governance of the firm. The folks here in the webinar may have heard of other, hopefully they've heard of B corporations, but if they haven't, they might have heard of, fair trade or organic. These are certifications of like certain products or processes. The B corporation is the only certification of a business, the holistic business, and it's very rigorous. And so as you're a consumer, people want to sort of shop with their values, but it's hard to tell actually what companies are actually the real deal or not. So when you see that B there, you can know that the company went through a very rigorous evaluation of its social and environmental performance. I should also say, you mentioned sort of globally, this is a movement that really has taken off globally. So it started in the US, around 2006, 2007, and now over half the B Corps are outside the US as in the US. And companies are finding it not only a way to actually help their social and environmental impact, but actually become better businesses. This is why I actually titled my book Better Business, because so many of the entrepreneurs that I interviewed said, actually going through this certification process, really it didn't just even help me with my social and environmental impact, better business. It's sort of like almost a playbook for good management. And so, it has lots of impacts.
Mm-hmm. One thing I read in your book was about employee retention. And so in that, I think particularly on the corporate side, there's so much around like the cost of turnover and like training and all of those sorts of things. And this idea of like paying it forward and then building, having paths for people to grow through the company, supporting them even through life transitions. It's the way that I would want my employer to function.
Right. No, exactly. I mean, it's sort of like, who wouldn't want to actually go to a sort of a positive, supportive workplace? But unfortunately, so many of them nowadays are not.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think this is where, if you ask me like what the biggest impact of being a B Corp is on the company, it's actually on the employee relations. And, so many of the companies I talked to said, our retention rate is way higher than any of our peer companies, industries from, sort of fast casual burrito makers to, Canadian in the US, Canadian-based IT consulting companies, beer brewers in the US. So, many companies have told me that their retention rates are way higher, and sort of showed me some of the, examples of that as well. I should also say that it also is an amazing employee attraction device. I interviewed a B Corp leader recently who's in sort of a unique industry, and she was telling me that many of the companies in her industry will say to her, this B Corp thing, why do you do it? I mean, what benefits you have? She goes, I never have to think about hiring anyone because no one leaves. And then when I'm growing, I've got a line of people out the door that want to come work for me because I'm a B Corp. So I think that this sort of benefit to employees, which then has a huge benefit on the company's bottom line, is one of the really big benefits of being a B Corp.
Alejandro, how about for you? What have you seen kind of day to day or as a business, some of the unexpected benefits or maybe expected benefits?
Yeah, so similar to one of the stories Chris shared, for us, for Global Gaming Initiative, obviously we were like one of the only tech companies that were a B Corp, and so it's even less understanding of what that even meant compared to like a consumer. But for us, and especially like as the B Corp movement has gained more traction and awareness around the world, like it's frankly given us more clout. Like we can land more deals and create more innovative ways to work with bigger game publishers, bigger game developers. And like they're excited too, because everyone is like in it, of course, like everyone wants to do good. And the B Corp sort of stamp of approval for us has just allowed us to like get our foot in the door in more places. So in our kind of business, that's been really one of the biggest value adds.
Yeah, I think it's a great point, because I think if you're doing a social impact business, one I've seen is one of the most common questions is, why aren't you just a nonprofit? And I think the more that I'm seeing that I see people who understand B Corps, the more they're like, oh, you're a B Corp. Okay, great. Or that's your goal is to become a B. Lee, how about you? What have you seen for Peace Coffee?
Yeah, I think that one of the unfortunate consequences of the way business has been traditionally structured is that short-term thinking is rewarded. And one of the great things about, or can be rewarded, I shouldn't say is definitively, but can be rewarded. And one of the great things about being a B Corp is you can step back and take the longer view, because you're balancing a bunch of different needs and a bunch of different ways that you're having impact in addition to generating profit. So for us, the ability to think about our supply chain and think about how we're having impact on our supply chain year after year after year has allowed us to really be able to track the impact that we're having and the benefit that we're having in coffee producing communities. So one of my favorite examples is that the first time I traveled to visit the farmer partners that we work with in Guatemala, that we've worked with for 2 decades, the big news was, we just got electricity up the mountain. And that was the big, like, everything is going to change for us. Fast forward to a couple of years ago, they're running field trials with different varietals of coffee. They're testing different kinds of input and different organic matter to see how that impacts the different varieties of coffee. They're hosting coffee companies to come down and taste the different varietals and have conversations with them about which will fare best in the marketplace. They've grown from, we just got electricity, to a sophisticated agribusiness, and we've been able to grow alongside them and continue to purchase more and more coffee so that they can build their business and their community.
That is a great story. And I would imagine, like, just even like being like from a family perspective, like having sort of like real life scientific experimentation as part of your mom and dad's work. I think I would imagine that the benefits go beyond even just the production of the coffee, but maybe into how people think and how they talk.
Well, absolutely. I mean, if you go from seeing a pretty bleak future in farming to seeing that this is a business, that really will change your experience as a child and as a member of the community.
Mm-hmm. Chris, one of the things that's weighed heavily on my mind is for people who are in traditional business, who have kind of this like fiduciary, profit shareholder responsibility. One of the lines from your book is that B Corps are cute social enterprises that could never succeed. And so I'm curious, how would you address that? And especially in this audience, we have people who are founders who are looking for investment capital. We also have people who are employees at Fortune 50s who are trying to inspire change within their organizations. What kind of guidance do you have for them? What would you say to that idea that it's a cute idea that will never succeed?
Yeah, well, hopefully the point of the book was that it's not, that sometimes it's characterized as that, but it's actually, not. So I'll just say a couple things to these 2 different audiences that you mentioned. One of the areas that I think, the B Lab and B corporations have made tremendous progress in is in sort of the private equity capital markets, venture capital investors. Basically every major investment every major venture capital firm, has B Corps in their portfolios, from, Kleiner Perkins, Andreessen Horowitz, New Enterprise Associates, all the major Google Ventures, TPG, all have B Corps in their portfolios, which suggests to me that, this is something that's not really, having an effect on the financial valuation of the firm, but actually something that's seen as a positive by these investors. 2 B Corps just in the last month went public. Lemonade Online Insurer went public on the New York Stock Exchange in July. Also in July, I guess it's a little over a month ago, a sustainably produced egg and other sort of farm product brand, Vital Farms, also went public. So, B Corps are getting private equity, venture capital money. They're, going public. So I think for the founders out there that somehow think, there needs to be some sacrifice that they'll, be missing out on investment. I think that's not really the case anymore. Maybe 10 years ago that was the case, but there's really been an increasing pickup of that. For the larger companies, this is something where I think that it's still a nascent movement among larger companies, but there's really positive growth in my opinion. So actually just within the past couple of weeks, B Lab announced a new program of theirs called B Movement Builders, which actually is a way for larger multinational companies to on-ramp to B Corp certification. We've talked a little bit about how, the certification is incredibly rigorous. And if you think about, you're some gigantic company that has operations in 29 countries and you got $30 billion in revenue, like sort of the getting started on this is a really daunting task. And so, B Lab realized that, let's actually help these companies plan a path to being a B Corp. One of the pioneers in this was Danone, the sort of global health nutrition, brand. Danone is a $30 billion company based out of Paris. Really taking this on in a really amazing way. So, most of our participants are probably in America, so they go into their refrigerators. They have Danone yogurt, Oikos yogurt, Silk soy milk, or Horizon organic milk. They'll see the B Corp logo actually on that because Danone has really been pioneering this large company process. And so this announcement I just mentioned is this new program. There's actually 6 global multinationals that are part of this, and they're working together to help each other in many ways, sort of work through this. And then, it's sort of as baby steps. First, they start maybe by certifying subsidiaries, by using the B Impact Assessment, the certification tool, to assess various parts of their business, and then they increase that over time until they could potentially be certified. Another multinational I want to mention, which is a really interesting one, is Natora, which is a cosmetics company out of Brazil. So they're, I think, now about a $10 billion company. They just purchased Avon in the US within the last year. And so, all of us probably remember the Avon ladies, as they, were called, driving around and selling things. And so that's actually part of a company that's a B Corp now. So, I think the B Corps are surprisingly present in all of our lives. And I think that, people haven't necessarily connected the dots on like, wow, all these companies are B Corps. And it's actually a very viable thing to do and actually very good for the business as well as society and the environment.
I do think, oh, go ahead.
Oh, I was just, for a business the size of Peace Coffee, what is valuable is our brand. And so if an investor is saying, what about B Corp certification? Is that, somehow diminishing the business? They probably don't understand where you're trying to compete and which consumer you're trying to compete for. When I'm telling Peace Coffee's brand story, I talk a lot about that consumer and how many consumers there are out there that are interested in businesses like Peace, businesses that do good in the world. So I think that if the investor isn't interested in that conversation, then you don't even need to try to bother to convince them about the B Corp certification.
I think that makes sense. I think about, also I just think about consumer sentiment a lot. I was at the mall picking up a Pokemon game for a birthday party, and I saw people in 3 for $10 t-shirts in plastic bags. And I just felt the sense of sadness, but then I remembered it wasn't that long ago that I was that person with a plastic bag full of t-shirts. And so I think so much about consumer sentiment and how do we, as people start to know the impact of, what does the supply chain look like from the garment industry? What does that mean? What does it take for you to get a $3 shirt in terms of labor, in terms of how it's been shipped, all of that kind of stuff? It actually doesn't feel that good anymore. I'm curious from all of your perspectives, how have you seen sentiment shift even from when you started to where you are now? And that's a free question for anybody, I guess.
I'll jump in first here and go off of Lee. with the Peace Coffee example, and this is where I see B Corps and every kind of purpose-driven brand, even if they're not a B Corp, of course, the percentage of people that are thinking in that way, making decisions on their consumption behavior in that way is increasing because all these companies are like creating their marketing, being clear, showing clear distinctions about what they're doing, why it matters, so on and so forth. And like that, so all of the B Corps and all of these companies that are doing that, they're helping the next entrepreneurs, the next businesses to have more customers that understand the message and like want to be a part of it. Ultimately, that's all of us. We all want to be a part of good. We're humans. We want the social connection and all of that. So my main message regarding like the B Corp's place in all of this is we have to remember that we're trying to shift a big cultural paradigm. And obviously it's economic in nature when it comes to the incentives and conditions of pricing and externalities and the things that are in front of us, the challenges that lay ahead. But we can continue to sow those seeds through these companies.
Chris, could you give like a sort of like a definition of externalities that my 10-year-old and my grandma could understand?
Sure. For me, it comes down to sort of the question of who pays. You know, you think about the most obvious, or sort of most famous externality is pollution and carbon taxes resulting from that. So, you know, a company, you know, to sort of follow on Alejandro's example of, you know, this, you know, people are short term and don't think about the externalities. So, you know, a company very short term, focused on delivering profits to shareholders. If it's spewing pollution out of its factories, you know, who pays for that? You know, not the company. That's why there's this movement to tax carbon, because, you know, then that actually internalizes the cost of that externality. So basically, it's because of the way, I guess, like social and environmental functions are priced. They don't actually have a value to them. The companies can exploit them as they pursue their profit. So I think it's you know, things the company has to pay for, basically, that can push on to the environment and society.
And can you describe externalities that are not physical externalities? So for me, one thing that weighs very heavily on my mind is AI, specifically social media, and the impact that it's had to sort of culturally. How would you talk about that kind of externality?
Yeah, sure. So I think that, yeah, so we have arguably you know, because perhaps maybe some of the social media platforms don't want to actually police the veracity of content, we have had a decline in democracy in our society, you know, arguably. I believe that, but maybe some other people don't. So I want to sort of leave it sort of a little bit open. But so that's an externality, because it's something where, you know, we live in a system where having fair and accurate elections are tremendously important to, you know, our future and livelihood. But because the company is not taking responsibility for how users are using its platform, it then sort of, you know, pushes that responsibility onto all of us with negative consequences, I would argue.
Yeah. Lee, I'm curious, what do you see ahead of us in the B Corp movement? Where do you see this going?
You know, I'm really I'm excited about the B Corp movement as someone who was involved early on in the fair trade movement and watched as you know, larger and larger stakeholders got involved, and then there was a lot of pressure on fair trade to meet the needs of those stakeholders, and I felt that the certification got really watered down. I think what's fascinating about the B Corp movement is the structure of it and the way that they are continually actually raising the bar, so that, you know, you can't stay static. Well, you could. Your score will go down. So over time, in order to recertify, you have to be using their blueprint to improve the way your business functions. I'm hopeful that that stays as part of the model. And I'm excited because I do see more and more businesses getting involved and being vocal, and you know, there's no longer this belief that to run a successful business you have to sit on the sidelines and not offend anybody. People want to buy things from businesses that represent a basket of values, and I think that consumer shift will continue to drive the companies getting more and more interested in the B Corp model.
I think that's lovely. I also sometimes I think back to the 80s and like the line from the movie. It's like greed is good. I can't remember what movie that is, but
yeah,
sort of that
Wall Street, Gordon Gekko.
Yeah.
And so this idea that like it can be win-win, that it doesn't have to be a zero-sum game, but that actually when we rise, we can all rise together.
That's my hope.
Yeah. And Alejandro, what do you see ahead of us? What do you see down the road?
I see two things of important for where B Corps are headed. First one is there's actually a chat in this talk that's perfectly sums it up. We've got a B Corp, and you know, I think many of us in the B Corp community feel this way, but I'll only speak for myself. We want to be able to enable everyone that's like a first-time entrepreneur, new business, small business, give them like the tools, the structure, the support, the network. Like for this to be a massive movement, it's got to be at the ground level, and it's got to be with lots and lots of people there helping to nurture those sparks in all of the little businesses that make up the majority of, you know, business in America and around the world, obviously even more so. So that's one thing in terms of where I see it going, and I'd like to, you know, be a part of. And secondly, we are seeing it a little bit, a lot more cross-company collaborations in terms of creating technical efficiency and like obviously addressing the massive problems that are the biggest in human history. There's got to be collaboration. We can't all improve within silos. It's just not going to get it done. So see some of that already in B Corps, in small little things. I mean, still important, but small in scope. Things like product packaging, we're seeing it, and a few other different kind of realms. But taking that and making that like the rule of the day of like, hey, we need to collaborate. We need to create efficiency. The only way we can do that is through many people, many companies coming together, not just in silos.
I totally agree. Stronger together. Chris, how about you? What do you think as you look ahead?
Yeah, I think that the collaborations are great. You know, some of my favorites, you know, I mean, that's the thing that what really attracted me in many ways to the B Corp movement is this idea that, you know, so many entrepreneurs, I mean, they want to, you know, they have these great ideas and they want to sell their products, sell their services. But the B Corp movement is about much more of a broader movement of, you know, entrepreneurs coming together to actually change fundamental systems. And, you know, it ends up with a lot of very interesting partnerships. So, you know, some of my favorites are, you know, Ben and Jerry's Ice Cream and New Belgium Brewery have gotten together and done some, you know, beer flavored ice cream and ice cream flavored beer, which I haven't tried either of those, but I would be very interested to do so. You know, I think as I look to the future, sort of two trends that really suggest to me that we're close to some tipping point on this, where, you know, the growth will be just much more exponential in the future. So, you know, one is, as I mentioned, this, you know, really focus on larger companies. You know, that's, you know, for a long time, the B Corp movement, as you sort of mentioned, you know, was seen as this, you know, small company, medium company, you know, companies that are pretty big. I mean, you know, Patagonia, seventh generation, you know, these are pretty large companies, but really in the overall scheme of things, they're just sort of medium companies when you compare them to companies like Danone. So I think, you know, one thing is this expansion to larger companies and larger companies taking on is really important. I also think generationally, you know, the millennials, Gen Zs, you know, they want to work for places that share their values. They want to buy from places that share their values. You know, this is actually the millennials are the largest generation now in the United States, sort of demographically larger than baby boomers, larger than Gen X, which is my generation, and they're only going to grow in importance. So I think that, you know, and there's lots of studies that have shown just how passionate they are, and I can tell from my own students, you know, as I've been teaching over the past 15 years, you know, the passion of people in the, you know, what to me are younger generations, is, you know, really gives me a lot of hope that this movement is going to continue to grow very fast.
I share that hope. So I want to open this up. I want to make sure the audience has time for questions. So if you'd like to come on screen and ask a question, you can knock on the moderation panel. Let's see, I have Matt Johnson. Anybody else who wants to ask a question live, feel free to join us. Or you can type a question into the chat. And so, oh, go ahead. Oh, Valerie, yes. Okay, what advice would you give to small businesses that share the B Corp values but can't get the certification? How can they contribute to the B economy?
I think, you know, one way I've heard this talked about is if you are in Minnesota, or if you could register as a company in Delaware, both have the ability to become a public benefit corporation. And I think that is a great first step, because the B Corp certification is very rigorous. A lot of businesses aren't to the stage yet where they can be providing the sort of supportive benefits that B Corporation certification really wants you to have. And that's just not the reality when you're a startup. So I think, you know, starting off and becoming a public benefit corporation, stating your public benefit, and then filing your report annually, which is what the state requires you to do, and start tracking. You know, you could go through the B Corp certification, learn about the kinds of things that B Lab wants you to track, and then start tracking that as part of your public benefit corporation report that you submit every year, and that will help you slowly get on the path. I think it's a great starter tool.
Mm-hmm. We have another question from Eduardo. How large is the movement? How many businesses, the share of particular industries?
I can say a little bit about that. So, you know, if you look at just simply the number of B corporations, it sounds relatively small. I mean, there is about 3,500, a little bit over 3,500 B corporations. However, if you start to think about the different tools and processes that B Lab has created, the companies you're using, like the benefit corporation type that Lee mentioned earlier, this B impact assessment, that is a certification tool that actually over 100,000 companies use to sort of measure what matters. A lot of, you know, VC companies use it as part of their due diligence to really understand the management quality of their, you know, their potential portfolio companies. So I think that it's something where, you know, the number 3,500, because it's very rigorous, you know, that number is always going to be small. And sort of the thesis of my book is not necessarily there should be more B corporations, but that more companies should be like B corporations by using these different tools. And so, you know, between all the different tools and investment companies, I would say it's in the hundreds of thousands of companies that are using this, and it's a global movement. So in 70 plus countries, you know, over 150 industries. So it's widespread and getting deeper.
Let's see, we've got a question from James. How do you envision the future of B Corps intersecting with the resurgence of unionized labor in the US? That's a great question.
I don't think they're mutually exclusive, certainly. You know, I think organized labor is a great tool, organizing and using a union to assure better working conditions. I don't think they're mutually exclusive. When you go through the B Corp certification, you know, how you treat your employees in terms of everything from wages, benefits, safety, you know, is definitely assessed, but there's so many other portions of your business that are looked at also. Yeah, I don't have a tremendous amount to offer other than that.
They'll all be working together.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think so too. I think, you know, we have a couple of minutes and there's no more questions. So I would ask you all, so for those of us who are sort of on the sort of nascent, on the, you know, we're in our infancy and we're working towards this, what kind of guidance do you have to kind of like keep us going? I think sometimes it feels tough to be competing against businesses that aren't holding themselves to the same standards. What rule of thumb or guidance or something that you would offer?
I mean, look, Peace Coffee competes head to head on the grocery store shelves with companies like Caribou, Starbucks. You know, a leading coffee brand in the Twin Cities, and the fact that we've been a B Corp has never really held us back. It's a question I get asked a lot, but it's a differentiator for us, and we capitalize on that. We use that to our advantage. You know, we are sold everywhere you can buy fine coffees in the Twin Cities, and we are determined to be a company that gives back to our community, and you know, we shout that loud and proud, and we feel like that helps us compete with companies that are much larger than us.
Yeah, and for me, so Global Gaming Initiative also created a mobile ad network called JUCO, which was an offshoot of the games business with the same mission. And so we help purpose-driven brands basically through advertising and all these new channels. And what I see is like, I've got big publishers coming to me because they're like, we want to run ads from really cool companies that are doing good. And so like, they know what's good for their bottom line. And what's good for their bottom line is showing people cool stuff that's good for the world that they're going to click on and purchase and support. And so that's what keeps me going, like knowing that even amidst the inequality and like that getting exacerbated and all these macro factors, like people still want to do as much as they can, even when they're personally getting more crunched. And so that gives me hope that we can change the paradigm and we can lead this new future.
People have said patience. Remember your mission and have patience and just keep going. And I think that's, for me, it's been a sort of a nurturing idea. So Lee, there's a question for you. Do you plan to expand beyond the Twin Cities?
Yes, we are available in grocery stores and mass retailers from the Denver area into Michigan. So, and we are expanding. We just expanded our Target map, our Whole Foods map. We're in a few different grocery stores, new grocery stores in the Chicagoland area. So yeah, we keep growing.
That's awesome.
Cool, that's great.
And let's see, I think we have time for one more. Let's see, James Lukazeski. In my experience with global companies in consumer goods, medical products, and light industries, I'll have very extensive compliance and independent monitoring and local certification requirements. Seems like it could be a manageable leap to move in the B Corp direction. Any thoughts on that? I think that's a great point.
Yeah, I think certainly having gone through a variety of the certification processes does, you know, position some of those companies well. And I would say that, you know, as I think about, you know, the larger B Corps, you have, you know, like Danone, obviously consumer goods, medical products. Actually, there's a pharmaceutical company, largest pharmaceutical company in one of the larger ones in Europe. It's the largest Italian one called Chessi, I think is the name of it. It's a B Corp. I would say though that, you know, frequently certifications are relatively narrow around a certain sort of, you know, process or product, whereas, you know, when you expand that to start talking about the impact in the community, the impact on employees, and you think about many multinationals, like even Danone's North American operation had, you know, 5 separate legal subsidiaries that each of them had to go through it separately. And you think about, you know, many companies have, you know, potentially hundreds of subsidiaries. So it can, the larger the company gets and the more complex it can get, you know, it's a pretty daunting challenge. But I think your intuition is right on, that having gone through these certifications, compliance programs, you know, makes those companies very well tuned for something like B Corps.
Well, I really want to thank you all. I think I love that there is so much expertise on this panel, and I love that we actually had a really great turnout. I think we were at 30 or so, which for these virtual events is actually quite high. So, and this will be recorded. I think the session will be available online in October. So any thoughts that anyone wants to leave us with before we wrap up? Alejandro, you want to go?
I mean, can shape the future. Obviously, we can't be so pessimistic where we have no hope, because then life isn't very meaningful. So we can do it.
Yes, be the change. I love it. Lee?
Oh, just be good, everyone. I feel hopeful that so many people turned out in a time that had so much uncertainty. So it's clear that other people want to have hope for the future. So that's great.
Chris?
Yeah, it's real gratifying to be with all of you. And I think in addition to the businesses, we all as consumers actually can play a role in how we spend our dollars. And I think that, people should be looking for the B or buying for local businesses, other social mission businesses, because actually the dollars we spend really can help shape our system.
Mm-hmm. All right, well, thank you all. Thank you so much for joining us. Oh, I forgot, we have information on your product. Chris, where can people find your book?
So I already put something in there, put it in there again, sort of being blatantly self-promotional. You can, that's on my website, there's information on the book. Yeah, great.
Perfect. And Alejandro, how can people find your games?
Visit globalgaminginitiative.com, and then you'll have everything from there.
Perfect. And is Outbreak Responder, is that brand new? Is that in response to the pandemic?
That was actually from 2014 with the collaboration with a German developer.
Wow, well, that was prescient. Lee, where can people find Peace Coffee?
Go to peacecoffee.com. You can order off of our website, or you can find a retailer near you.
And it's actually on sale at the co-op right now, so make sure you go.
Yeah.
All right, thank you all. Have a wonderful afternoon.
Thanks.
Thank you, Sarita. That was a great panel. Great.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.